What's up guys, Chris Burandt here. I'm in the hometown of Polaris, Roseau, Minnesota. This is like one of my favorite places in the world to come because, well, you're gonna see there's a lot of cool stuff. Myself, I own Burandt's Backcountry Adventure. I have the coolest job on the planet. I get to ride snowmobiles over 200 days a year, but we got some cool stuff. Come on. You guys want to know one of the coolest things about my job? I get to go into places like this and I get to take you with me. Come on. All right guys, I notice on every Polaris oil bottle, it says Polaris Engineered Lubricants. What all goes into that name and what does it stand for?
Well, the Polaris Engineered Lubricants means that we develop these oils in conjunction with our engine. Everything runs in parallel to ensure that we're keeping on the forefront of where our engine technology is going. You know, as markets evolve and as consumer demand increases, we need to ensure that our engines are not only at the forefront of power, but also on reliability and durability, and that we're continuing to improve our efficiency and economy of our engines. And the oil plays a huge part of that because we're setting the same goals for the oil that we do for the engine because they need to work together.
On an engineering standpoint, where does that fall in your plate?
I think it's an extension of exactly what Dallas said. I think every component on this engine is Polaris engineered for the loads, the temperatures, the operating environment that it experiences in the same way that the oil is engineered for those same reasons.
I can't imagine the monumental task of developing a new oil. Can you guys start to describe to me what goes into the testing and validation to make sure that a new oil meets or exceeds your guys' expectations? And what are you looking for?
Absolutely. Right when we start at the very beginning, we need to look at where our engines are most sensitive. So it starts with where most critical temperature areas are, where we need the most oil delivery. We set down a list of goals of where we want to be from a pour point standpoint, a flow standpoint, a durability, a wear, and just sort of putting together that picture of what that performance of that oil is going to look like. And then we start working with our suppliers, developing different formulations to understand what is going to be feasible and what's going to work best for us. They'll provide us list samples and we'll run through a series of bench tests. We'll run through cold pour point, we'll run through cold pumpability with electric oil pump. We'll do cold pumpability with mechanical oil pump. We'll look at the overall properties and temperature ranges of the oil. And then we'll just keep iterating through as we find more and more deficiencies until we come up with a formulation that we believe in and we're ready to actually start testing on engines to evaluate the wear patterns and the durability.
On our final iteration, iteration Q, we have over 1,000 dyno hours on it in total and over 40,000 field miles run on the oil. And this is across all platforms, your 550, your 600, 600 race, 800, 850. We want to make sure that this oil is going to work with all of our engines. So
you said iteration Q, so that means you guys had 17 different revisions before you got to the oil that you wanted to run?
Absolutely. So some of them never made it off the test bench. We do a cold pump test, find it wasn't good enough. Some of it made it all the way to dyno testing. Some of it went through development dyno testing where we would do acid testing on it. But we wanted to ensure that what we were going to be delivering to customers was going to meet the needs of the marketplace.
As I hear you guys talking about iterations and versions and testing and developing, how long does a process like this take?
So from start to finish, from laying out the initial goals and determining what we need to something that is saleable, takes about 24 months for an oil formulation. So this isn't something that we develop over the period of a couple months. It's 2 years of very dedicated work requiring generally 5 to 8 people almost dedicated full-time to working on the project.
You know, one other thing too is that these are developed for this specific machine or this lineup of machines, and no other aftermarket company is going to the extreme that you guys are doing.
Right. And we develop our oil in conjunction as we're developing engines. So these two different items are developed in parallel You know, we look a lot at the oil delivery volume, the oil delivery location, and then the oil quality is the third aspect of that, that it's of equal importance to everything else that we do. So we're trying to ensure that our engines are going to be the most durable they possibly can, and the oil quality is a huge part of that.
You guys have 3 different offerings in the Polaris lubricants lineup. Tell me, what's the difference between all 3?
Right, so we have our blue, and that's for fan-cooled, non-exhaust valved engines with a focus on cold climate. Then we have our VES, that's our standard oil used across the whole Liberty engine line. And then we have our VES Extreme, and that's sort of the next step for those extreme riders in harsh conditions, harsh temperatures, or somebody just wanting a little extra protection for their engine.
It's awesome to be able to talk to you guys about oil and how it gets to this point, but you know, for me what's exciting is, in my opinion, I am the definition of the customer looking for that next step or that next performance with Extreme. If you guys ever, you know, see any of the videos and fun stuff I get to do, you know, I am commanding a lot out of my snowmobile each and every day, whether, you know, it's one of my big builds or it's my stock sled that goes out each and every day. And especially our fleet, you know, our fleet, I've been so happy with the performance and reliability of VES, and now with VES Extreme for my demand use, it's awesome.
Right, and you're exactly the type of consumer that we're looking for to use Extreme. Lots of wide open throttle, that aggressive riding, and you know, that's really what we formulated Extreme for.
We have all these gnarly machines now, the new 850. What are you guys looking for when you start to develop the next generation oil?
Right, well, we had a list of goals for this oil, but first and foremost, we're looking for durability and reliability. We want to make sure that our components are protected.
So in these durability tests you guys do, what is the durability test?
Right, so these tests are supposed to be representative of how the consumers are riding. So we have wide open throttle, we have mid-range, we have all the different exhaust valve positions, and we make sure that we are testing them just like the consumer is going to ride them.
So how many miles does, say, like this set of test pistons have on it?
So we will test to 6,000 miles.
Okay, and at 6,000 miles, what are you looking for as far as wear?
When we look at a piston after test, we're mostly looking for this skirt wear, and generally the most skirt wear comes from these oil grooves where the exhaust port is, and we're also looking for cleanliness of the lands, the underdome, and then the wear that's going to happen in your pin bores.
Every aftermarket oil company says they test on Polaris snowmobiles. What's the real difference between how they test and how you guys test?
Right, so our dyno regimen and our test cycle is unique to Polaris, and we've developed this cycle over years of looking at consumer data. So nobody else has this test cycle, and although they're doing tests, we don't really know how long those tests are or how they're testing them, how aggressively they're testing them. So these pistons that we're looking at were part of our oil versus aftermarket oil testing. So we have VES Extreme pistons that went on the dyno for an equivalent of 6,000 miles, and then we also ran just shorter 50-hour tests to see how the competitor oils would do against VES. So we have our VES pistons here, and then we have competitor R and 2 competitor A's. So the VES Extreme ran to 115 hours. It looks good. Skirts look very new, very minimal graphel wear. The VES also looks very good. A little more wear on the skirts, but still looking very new for the amount of time put on them. And then when we get to competitor R here, we actually had a lower rod bearing failure on the mag. And that lower rod bearing failures are one of the first things you're going to see when you have low quality oil or not the right oil for your engine and your engine's appetite. Then over here for competitor A, they look like very different failures, but they both stem from a lot of wear in the pin bores here. So if that oil is not sufficient enough in the pin bores, you'll get a lot of polishing, a lot of wear. That allows the piston to rock, and you'll get a lot of this scuffing and eventually catch a ring, which happened to this piston. Or this one, the pin bores wore down so badly that it propagated a crack. So you usually will initiate a crack in the pin bore and it'll propagate out and around, and this one was able to actually go around the skirt, flex the skirt, and eventually fail.
How do you make your stuff not fail, but the competitors are failing? What are the other key ingredients to making this work?
Right, well, we develop our oils to work for our engines and the type of conditions that we're putting our engines through. So especially with VES Extreme, we have ester in the formula and some of the base stocks. So that's going to allow you to have really good lubricity, work at cold temperatures, and also be able to withstand the heat and speed once you start getting up to speed in hot conditions.
Well, the crazy thing about our sport is how extreme the weather is. I mean, we ride in minus 30 all the way up to plus 40. In that minus 30, that's when our oil is so important. What do you guys do with your key ingredient to make our sleds live?
Right. Well, it's sort of a balancing act. So you want a thin oil to have that lubricity, but you also can't have it too thin because it can flash off at hot temperatures and cause cracking or too much wear and polishing as well.
Well, one thing that I really don't have to deal with much is the scent of an oil because I'm always in the front, which is awesome. But you know, this is a real key piece with a lot of the riders out there. Talk about what you guys' agenda was with the scent of the new oil.
Right, so with VES Extreme, we wanted to make it just as good, if not better than VES, and we were actually able to achieve no smell. So there's no odor with the VES Extreme when you're running.
Well, and that's really important, especially for the more time we spend on the snow with people who aren't necessarily snowmobiling, especially like up in my area where we have lots of cross-country skiers and everything. You know, anything that we can do to help the impact is awesome, so great job. Again, we talk about all these extreme conditions that we ride in, whether it be elevation or temperature. Speaking of temperature, what were some of the goals that you guys had with VES Extreme on the colder side of things?
Right, so with VES Extreme, a major focus was for cold flow and cold pull effort. So cold flow, we made better 15 to 20% down to minus 40, and then cold pull effort, we reduced by up to 20% as well.
Another reason why this oil is specifically engineered for Polaris Snowmobiles. As a consumer and enthusiast of this sport, you all have the choice of what you put in your snowmobile oil-wise. But for me, especially after today, it really validates why I choose Polaris lubricants. They are the best, engineered for the way I ride and what I do. For more information, visit PolarisLubricants.com.